Hello everyone, welcome to week 6 of our English composition class. This week we're working on definition essays. We're going to be reading a definition essay by John Krakauer called On Being Tent-Bound. We read a definition essay last week, What Happiness Is by Eduardo Porter. And you're going to be working on a definition essay in the coming weeks. Part of that definition essay and part of most academic writing asks you to use sources. Outside journals, magazines, newspaper articles, online content that you bring to your paper to support your ideas. Now, generally, sources are used to support your claims. You state an idea about a topic, and then you support it with an outside source. It can add credibility to your writing. Sometimes it helps give examples of several points of view on a subject. And this is one that I rarely see students use sources for, outside sources, but I find it to be one of the best and most interesting. Sometimes you can bring up a source that you then want to disagree with. You can highlight a position or an argument that you present and then show why it's incorrect. Also, you can do the opposite of that, which is how most people use sources to support their ideas. Sometimes you might be discussing a particularly interesting phrase or sentence or passage that you want to use, so you're going to directly quote the original. It expands depth and breadth of your writing, and it helps to extend your ideas. Summaries, which we worked on last week, are taking a longer article, longer magazine, longer newspaper article, and reducing it to a paragraph. You're highlighting basically the main points. You're giving a brief overview of a longer source. It's shorter, certainly, than the original source. And you can do this effectively with a multi-page chapter where you can reduce that to one paragraph, especially if you're focusing it on one particular thing. A paraphrase is taking a sentence for a sentence. You're almost swapping equal parts. You're taking something from an outside source and then putting it in your own language. You want to make sure in paraphrasing that you're not copying their language. If you are, that's a direct quote and you need to cite it as such. But a paraphrase is very focused. It might be a particular idea you want to lift and put into your paper, and you need to make sure you're giving the source credit for where it came from. And finally, a direct quote, maybe the most common that people use, although summaries are pretty common too. That's when you're lifting a sentence or two sentences from a journal, magazine, an outside source and putting it right in your paper. With any source, you need a signal phrase. And this signals the reader that an outside source is coming their way. To do this, you're going to need a few things. You're going to need the author's last name, or the author's name in general. You can use their full name. Generally, the author's credentials and a verb. The verb that people usually use is says. John Smith in the Portland Press Herald says, but you can use different verbs, and there's a list of them in our textbook. Acknowledges, insists, states, points out, suggests, believes, reports, admits. The more specific word you use, the better idea the reader's going to get about why you're using that source. Here's an example. How much higher skyscrapers of the future will rise than the present world marvel the Sears Tower is unknown. However, the design of one twice as tall is already on the boards, and an architect, Robert Sobel, thinks we currently have sufficient know-how to build a skyscraper with over 500 stories. Okay, let's break down this source here. We have a couple things going on. For me, my guess this came from an interview that the author, Bachman, did with an architect, Robert Sobel. This happened on page 15 of the source. And what we have here is not a direct quote, but a paraphrase that Robert Sobel thinks we currently have sufficient know-how to build a skyscraper with over 500 stories. If it was a direct quote, if it was something copied word for word from the source, we'd need to put that in quotes. This isn't a summary. It's not taking a longer thing and reducing it. It seems to me a paraphrase. One sentence for one sentence. And not only do we have the speaker's name here, we have their credentials as well, an architect. do a paraphrase and a direct quote together. This is the final thing I think I'll say about sources. Climbing mountains will never be safe, predictable, rule-bound enterprise. It is an activity that idealizes risk-taking. Its most celebrated figures have always been those who stuck their necks out the farthest and managed to get away with it. Climbers as a species are simply not distinguished by an excess of common sense. Now this is from an article by John Krakauer. And if I wanted to use this in an essay, I wanted to take this from the article and put it into my own writing. I want to do both a paraphrase. I want to take this idea and kind of put my own spin on it, but then also quote the author as well. So according to author John Krakauer, I've got a great signal phrase there. I've got the author. I've got the author's name. I've got their credentials. I've got a cool verb, according to. Climbing is a dangerous enterprise which requires taking chances without using, quote, an excess of common sense. I've just used this last part here as a direct quote, and the rest is a paraphrase. This is another way of integrating sources into your work. Now, this is something that you're going to be working on for your definition essay. Next week, you're going to start that definition essay this week by doing a little pre-writing. The essay assignment is to define an experience. It's modeled after Krakauer's essay On Being Tent-Bound, in which he discusses the experience of on being tent-bound. You're going to choose an experience to define for the reader. You're going to bring some outside sources to that definition. In the past, I've had a lot of great essays with this assignment on being a marathon runner, on being a concert goer, on being a parent, on being a college student, on being stuck in traffic. A lot of great ones. And so think about something you know fairly well that you want to explore a little bit with some research, and something that is definable, something that might be fun to think about the categories of definition that you're going to use. For the discussion assignment this week, you're going to do a little of that pre-writing work with that essay assignment. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out, and I appreciate your time. Have a great week.